The rise and the fall of the modern mullet. I'm a barber, so this is something I know an awful lot about. Part 1. Introduction pre-2019. What is a mullet? A mullet, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, can be described as a hairstyle worn especially by men, in which the hair is cut short at the front and sides and left long at the back. Some say the mullet is so called because it's named after the mullet fish, due to the hairstyle's resemblance to the fish's distinctive tail. Though the mullet itself was most popular prominently in the 1980s, the term mullet itself is cited to have risen to popularity in the 1990s, due in part to the Beastie Boys song Mullet Head, which comedically highlighted the hairstyle's cultural significance. Here's the song, if you wondered, with subtitles. A brief history of mullets. Mullets date back to ancient civilizations. Both the ancient Sumerians and Assyrians had mullets, for example, but the mullet has appeared haphazardly throughout history. In the 18th century, European aristocracy donned mullets, often symbolising their status. So basically, the mullet has always been knocking about in some form or another. But let's talk about the proper predecessor to the modern mullet, the original mullet, if you will. The mullet began to gain traction in the 1970s, but exploded in popularity in the 1980s. It was influenced by the rise of rock, glam rock, and even pop music. The hairstyle became a favourite amongst musicians and the fans alike. The style was part counterculture, part mainstream fashion. It depended on who wore it, how it was worn, you know the deal. Iconic mullets of days gone by. When you think of iconic mullets from the 1970s to the 1980s, who do you think of first? George Michael's iconic Princess Diana-esque bouffant mullet, Paul McCartney's awful Wings era mullet, Patrick Swayze's glorious Dirty Dancing do, action hero Kurt Russell's rugged mullet in Escape from New York, David Bowie's 1,000,001 different mullet iterations, or is it Billy Ray Cyrus's horrible, disgusting hick mullet? It's Billy Ray Cyrus's horrible, disgusting hick mullet, isn't it? That brings us to the first decline. By the 1990s, the mullet's reputation had seriously suffered. As fashion trends evolved, our lovely mullet was left behind in the dirt. It was outdated and often parodied. The portrayal of mullets in media went from hero to zero. It became a symbol of tackiness associated with the uncool and rednecks. A 1997 Independent article said, "Connoisseurs of the absurd in gentlemen's hairdressing have been enjoying a laugh at those unfortunates who continue to commit that most heinous fashion don't, the mullet." And the 1998 Mirror supplement said, "The mullet, if you have one, then a word in your ear, scissors." So what came after the 1980s mullets? Hairstyles have a tendency to flip-flop between lengths when it comes to popularity. Every trend is about contrasting the previous trend. Mullets were loose and dishevelled and carefree, so the trends of the 90s veered a lot smarter and shorter. Trends included bobs and curtains, bowl cuts, pixie cuts, all drastically different to the styles of the previous decade. Part 2. The rise of the modern mullet, 2019 to 2021. Mullets in modern barbering. As a barber, I've been vaguely aware of modern mullets since kind of 2018, 2019. I even had one myself back then and I looked like a cunt. Barbers were keen on doing mullets for editorial photo shoots because it highlighted not only their ability to do fades, which up until then was the definitive barber style, but as barbering was slowly merging into hairdressing, it meant they could showcase their scissor work and their skills with longer hair. The mullet was the obvious next step from all the overplayed skin fade-centric cuts. It was looser, it was cooler, it was fresher, it was no longer crops and peaky blinders shit. Thank God. COVID-19's impact on the mullet. Just as the mullet was starting to really kick off, something else kicked off, the pandemic, cheers 2020. With no barbers to turn to, the general public took matters into their own hand. Some buzzed their hair off, sure, but many mulleted themselves. As a barber, I hate this, but as someone who looks like she should have gone to art uni, I love it. The mullet is the logical self-haircut because you just cut what you can see. You ignore the back. The back doesn't matter. The Y2K influence. What's the 2000s got to do with mullets, Jimmy? Well, everything and also nothing. Whilst mullets are inherently 1980s fashion had already had its revival in the mid-late 2010s, with thanks in part to shows like Stranger Things, and the 1990s had already had its revival too. So what was left for the 2020s? According to the standard fashion cycle, the 2000s revival, or the Y2K aesthetic as it's more commonly called online. Those too young may not remember, but mullets were essentially popular in the early 2000s, taking the form of a faux hawk or doe, hence the name. These were more akin to mohawks rather than mullets. So what do you get when you mix Y2K nostalgia and the barbering scene post-2010s fades? The modern mullet, the Australian/New Zealand, and the rugby impact. Outside of the Pinterest-centric fashion world I seem to be stuck in, the mullet never actually died down under, especially amongst rugby and Australian football players. It's a cult haircut for Aussie and New Zealand rugby lads, making these guys some of the early adopters of the mullet. Basically, if you had a mullet circa mid-2019 to mid-2021, you're one of the cool ones. After that, however, part 3, the peak of the modern mullet, 2022 to 2023, working with mullets. As a barber, the mullet had become another short back in size to me. Initially, I was so excited to be doing these mullets, but it became very normal very, very quickly. I think maybe 1 in 3 haircuts was a mullet during its peak. I remember we were keeping a tally of all the mullets we'd cut at the shop I worked at, but it got tiring very, very quickly, like we lost count. Celebrity inspirations. When a haircut's popular, famous figures will get it, and their fans will also get it. That's just how fashion and trends work. I can't tell you how many people bought in pictures of Paul Mescal and Hector Ballerin as inspo. What can't be understated as well is the impact TikTok also had on the mullet. TikTokers on there would showcase their mullets in their videos, often doing hair 360 videos for people to bring to the barbers. This, to an extent, applies to YouTubers and Instagram influencers too, but I think TikTok is the most noticeable because of that personalised aspect where they're doing the proper showcase of the cut. The mullet was ever evolving and people were wearing it in many different ways, and thanks to people being able to show off their mullets online and celebrities having them at film premieres and red carpets, Jacob Elordi did numbers at the latter end of 2023 with his approach to the mullet, which is what I'd call a soft mullet. Mullets, everyone and their nan had them. Everyone had this really cool hairstyle, but if everyone's cool, no one's cool. Kids were getting mullets. And when a kid gets a fashionable haircut, that is not a fashionable haircut anymore. Part 4, the decline of the modern mullet, 2024, present day. I love mullets, I really do. My boyfriend has one and I'd never have him not have one. They're fun, they're cool, and because they can be so personalised to each individual, they're very flattering. I believe many who've had mullets the past couple of years have found their definitive haircut and they won't be moving forward from there. But if you're getting a mullet now, what are the fashion forward people actually doing? Fashion forward people ditched the modern mullet ages ago. If you're on trend, this style of mullet is dead and buried. They've already gone past the soft mullet evolution, trust me. What's the next evolution then? As I said earlier, hair trends are almost always about contrasting the previous trends. Fades turned into modern mullets and modern mullets turned into soft mullets. And moving forward from there, the fashion forward crowd tend to go one of 2 ways. They either do a 1990s style scissor cut. These can be worn longer and shaggier, like a mop top, so sort of Damon Albarn of Blur in like 1996. Or you can have it shorter and choppier like Brad Pitt in Fight Club. Some people are calling this the warrior haircut now, and fuck knows where that stupid name came from. The other direction you can go in is mod cuts. Mod cuts are better suited for those into high fashion and like editorial style fashion, or just Oasis super fans. Nothing wrong with that. It's worth adding in that these haircuts have remnants of the mullet. Most of these cuts you'll notice are slightly longer in the back. The mullet lingers. We never really wanted to let go, did we? Why did we ever let go in the first place? But now what do we do? Once the short scissor cut trend is over, and that won't be for a while, people will be craving that contrast again, and the fade will rise up from the ashes of the Paul Mescal and Jacob Elordi wannabes. Mark my words. Thank you for watching. This is my first like proper long format video. Normally the most I do is about 3 minutes, so this is extremely long-winded for me. If you've come over from my TikTok or Instagram, thank you. Yeah. Bye bye.